Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Board Revision hearing. We apologize in advance for the delays that we had in solving some bugs. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland, the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from the Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Neil Harden. I'm chairing today's panel. With me in the room is Laurie Davidson, and via Zoom is Jeff Peitsch. The secretary today is Stephen Lund, and the assessors today are Jamie Fougere and Nathan Kupfer. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in a waiting room until your property is called upon. When it's your turn, you will be admitted to the meeting. Kindly follow along in the City of Winnipeg Board Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you to the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment role in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made in this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council and is independent of it in the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing, and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the applications of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, and the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 4, 7, 8, 9, and 10 on their docket today. Mr. Lund, can you please affirm the assessor and the applicant for the first property, which will be 1329 Portage Avenue.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Jamie Fougere.
You affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Speak here or come
You can come up here.
Come up here, yes.
Wasn't sure.
Can you break, take a seat? I will affirm you. Ms. Applicant, please state your full name.
Joel Kirkton.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Okay, Mr. Fougere, can you please start with your presentation on 1329 Portage Avenue?
Okay, so I'm gonna bring it up here. Oh. So the property that we're beginning with is, as mentioned, 1329 Portage Avenue. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we just can't see you.
Oh.
Mr.
Okay.
Lund, we can't see you.
I have my video on.
Or you've got a box there, but nothing in it. We're checking on that. Apparently we
Okay.
can get all the bugs worked out.
Oh, it's on this one.
No, just that one. It's looking over my shoulder, but I can't see him.
Right. Okay. I do see myself on on the video screen behind you.
Yeah. But not on the one that before us. Yeah. Just when you think you've got all the bugs out.
Right. Yeah. By the end of the cycle, we'll have it
Yeah.
all worked out.
We won't have to introduce all new different problems to solve.
That's how it goes.
I think it's in the Constitution of learn things. Specific to the screen.
Can we just do that?
Are you able to hear us on the Zoom stream? Okay, perfect.
It's a sharp, you know, what we're doing without the visual unless. That's just something we absolutely has to show us. Okay, what we'll do then is we'll just continue unless, I think if there's something, that you absolutely have to show us visually, then I guess we can turn around and look at the other screen. So you can proceed, Mr. Project.
Okay, that sounds good. All right. So as mentioned, we're looking at 1329 Portage Avenue first. The roll number here is 1300367500. If you guys have my brief open, you can see on page 2, I have a couple photographs here. First is on page 2. The subject property is on the corner, highlighted there or outlined in purple. And then you can see on page 3 a Google Street View of the property. And so you can see 2 pizza restaurants here. The one that we have today is Slices Pizza right on the corner here. And on page 5 of my brief, you can see my comparables. There's a range on Portage here between 1394 all the way up to 2150, I believe is the highest that I have here. I think a reasonable comparison to the subject here, you'd be looking at, for example, number 1819 Portage Avenue has a rate of 1570. And just above that, there's another at $15. I think basically between $13 and $16 would be the range for the subject. Previous cycles, we've had the basement premise included. However, the space is unfinished, so that has been removed. And you can see the workup on page 6. So we have the rental rate there of $15.08, 6% vacancy, 3% for expenses, and 7.1 for the capitalization rate. So I think that, like I mentioned, I think a reasonable range is between $13 and $16. I had a conversation with the owner, and I think we'll hear from her insofar as her experience at the property and her suggestion on value. But unfortunately, I don't think we were able to come to any agreement. Having spoken to my supervisor about the property as well. But that's the information that I have, and that's my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, do you have any questions of the assessor?
Oh, no, I don't have any questions.
Okay, do you have any questions?
I just had a question around your comparables. You said that ranging from 13 to 16, you pointed out 2 of these, and they're all on Portage. Are they all not residential? Are they all the same kind of property and property use?
No, some of the higher ones that you're seeing here, for example, 1885 Portage Avenue, that is a property, we'd call it a neighborhood shopping center. And so it's this one here, for the first 2, for example, it is anchored by a grocery store, and there's basically 2 strip malls that run alongside the parking lot. So those are included more as a contrast to show that what type of rent you'd be looking at Portage if it were sort of newer prime retail space.
So what were the ones that you said were the best comps?
So I think for example, 610 Portage Avenue, 912 Portage Avenue, really the ones, and I think this is indicative of sort of the quality of the retail space. So for example, 610 Portage Avenue, it's much more a retail store, so there's no parking in front. Same thing with 912 Portage Avenue and 1819 Portage Avenue as well.
Did you use the one next door, the Pizza Hotline, in your picture?
I did look at that possibility. It's not clear to me what is happening there with the rent, given the information we've received back from the property owner. It's showing a rental rate of $29. And in my experience, that's an outlier at the very least. If not, it's perhaps a book rent or like not an arm's length transaction. But it did not seem reasonable for the subject. And I think that's supported, given that even, as I mentioned, more desirable retail spaces. For example, the first two comparables would suggest a rental range of, $20, $22. And so when I was seeing the 29, I found that to be highly suspect and did not include it.
And I just note that most of them are newer.
Right. Yeah. As I say, 1819 Portage Avenue. Again, I think that's one of the ones that I thought fit fairly well. And it has a year built of 1948. And where are we here? It looks like 1928 was the original year built on the subject here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, just on these comparables again. This is at 1329 Portage, which is across the street from Advance, basically somewhere in that area.
Yep. Correct.
The other ones, the 1800 and that would be west of Polo Park, Route 90.
Right.
Are those locations? I mean, they're different locations. Is the location much of a factor in this regard?
I don't think it's as much of a factor as is the property type. There from year to year, we don't necessarily have the same comparables appear in our list of evidence that we can put together for a potential variety of reasons. But this is what was available for the subject here in terms of comparison. And I think from what I've seen, I've had this property previous. I think for a retail store that is in working order, I think between $13 and $16 makes sense for a rental rate. I think as you get further into the sort of extremes of towards the perimeter, for example, out west, or towards the downtown out east on Portage, I think you may find there is some more locational impact towards the rents, but I am satisfied that this is that these comparable rents comparables are within a similar, they're similar enough to be supportive of the rental rate that we have.
Okay. Now you're referring to this as retail. Is that how you're classifying it rather than restaurants?
Correct. Yes. And that stems from a decision, a modeling decision, and sort of administration decision to look at units, for example. This is a retail store, so it doesn't have the parking in the front like a strip mall. But for example, the idea was that, for example, in a strip mall, the current tenant might be a small pizza restaurant that does takeout, similar to this. Or, if it goes vacant, it could easily become a nail salon or an insurance office or just about anything. It's not, the physical characteristics of the building aren't such that you can, truly say this is specifically a restaurant. There's some HVAC and obviously some kitchen stuff, with a takeout pizza restaurant, but it's not to the same extent as, say, a standalone restaurant or a fast food restaurant with a drive-through. So we've made that distinction, and it appears that I think in a case like this, you wouldn't find really any rental change between, again, such an example as a strip mall, between one unit that was, a takeout restaurant or another that was an insurance place. So we've opted to just call it retail space in general here.
Okay, in terms of if it's takeout and delivery, I noticed there's probably no parking right in front of it on Portage Avenue, seeing that there's a bus stop there. Parking would have to be behind the building.
Or potentially alongside.
Okay.
But yes, that's right.
Would that relative lack of parking affect its alternative use as a retail one?
Well, the retail stream that we have here is actually intended to reflect the lack of parking. So, for example, just that straight retail. Otherwise, we call it strip mall or a neighborhood shopping center, but we call it retail here, and that means that all of the retail inventory in which this is modeled against, likewise, does not have parking. It may have a space or two at the rear, but everything that is compared within the retail store, we'll call it, model, is like the subject. And if you look on the page 2, you can see, none of these buildings within the screenshot here have a parking lot in front. And so it's reflective of the land to area building ratio and, visibility, accessibility, current modes of retail spaces. This is dated. And so it's within that model that this rental rate was generated. So it's not comparing it to strip malls or neighborhood shopping centers, for example.
All right, thank you. Those are my questions. So you may proceed then with your presentation.
Sure. Can I just have a couple of points of questions to clarification
sure,
and discussion?
sure.
Just 2 points. You mentioned that towards downtown, east or west. Does that make a difference of value? Like if you're going towards east, towards downtown, and then is it right downtown? Does it go up square footage, perhaps, or down, or into St. James? Is there a certain?
I think that there may be, like locationally, I think that there may be some sort of hot spots, if you will, on Portage. But from what I can tell, sort of we're in sort of the middle section here. If you were, very close to Polo Park, you may find, I think that the rates were higher. And if you were right downtown, I think you may find that some areas that they're lower, as well as out by the perimeter down Portage. I would think that's changes, the character of the neighborhood changes. But I would suggest that these are the list that I have here are comparable locations on Portage Avenue, and I recognize that they're not, immediately beside each other. But given the amount of owner occupied spaces on Portage Avenue, sort of in between, as well as, for example, I mentioned Polo Park. I think this is a reasonable comparison.
The reason I asked is I noticed the last round, which also kind of off topic, but does accept my interpretation of where my building is. We've been moved to the inner city area, and that had a bad impact on my insurance rates. I had to find companies and such like that.
You've kind of given evidence, so.
Okay, no, I just had a question for that, that's fine, we'll go on to the next person. That's what I was just meaning.
Yeah,
that-
okay, you can present that as part of
Okay,
your.
Thank you, sorry. Okay, basically, thank you for finding the comparables, I appreciate that, because it is hard to find. Pretty much everything that you guys have explained about my property, but I did have a couple questions. For the assessment part, it was basically assessed every year. And I know from speaking with you guys in the past that some of the assessments values are compared to other properties and things, you know, depending on some might be under, some might be over, but I'm not comparing that. I'm just comparing it to myself. So the my presentation basically would be, if we're owner occupied, does it make a difference? Where we are in the city makes a difference. Age of the building. These are all things that come into to reflect on my property value, I would think. And basically the value that we had last year was like 179. So if we're going up in an increase, that would be almost probably more than 30% easily. So I feel usually in the market value, it's usually about 3% or 4%. So for such amount of increase, I don't feel it's really warranted. So between the 13 and I think you said 13 and 17%, somewhere we should be on the low end of even 12 or 13, if you're basing it upon the square feet of, because I'm not sure where you pull all these numbers from, but I'm just saying as evidence for my property, we basically covered all the costs on that, and that's why I'm here today asking for a reduction in value, hence the reduction of my property.
That 12 to 13 you mentioned was for the rental rates.
Well, I was just basing it upon, if you guys base it upon that, I'm looking at assessed value of the property. I feel to go to 265 is quite high from a jump from the 179, considering we never missed a year of if you want to call it, it's not like I was forgotten about or sent in the corner. So I'm trying to, in my mind, warrant that. And that's hence my question I started to ask him, does it make a difference? I get that there's little pockets and different things. And, 80 years from now, that might be a city hotspot. 10 years from now, however it is, all these things affect it. And does it also take into consideration of owner occupied? Because like I said, we can't get a more lucrative tenant or split up the property and sell it to other people or whatever. It's just us paying. We can't, if we increase our rent to increase our rent, that's us still paying. I was asking if that came into play with any of those things. Basically, that's all the evidence I have is, as I said, you guys, it pretty much covers the whole property. And as far as for next door, I can tell you, I know that they just took over with a new owner. I don't know what documentation is there, but I know every few years they franchise it again. A new franchise family came in there. So I don't know what kind of, maybe that's part of their franchise fees or something that's built into that cost of that. I have no idea. I'm just letting you know this. So basically in closing, that's what I would wish that my property, it is a lovely property and I care for it dearly and take well care of it, but it's just not warranted in my mind from the 179 to 265 all of a sudden when every 2 years it has been assessed. So it's not like it lagged behind.
Okay, Mr. Fougere, do you have any questions?
I think I have just maybe one question. So the lot, just to kind of catch people up, the value of 179 that she had mentioned, that Joelle had mentioned, was a board decision from last cycle. But what I was wondering about, you had mentioned in your brief here that there's a trend of 2 to 3% over 5 years, value increase over 5 years. I was just wondering how you arrived at that figure.
Basically, I went on to many of the real estate sites and I just went into trends or things like Manitoba Real Estate Association Board, or there's like RE/MAX, different things, and all of them seem, some were forecast and some were actual historical, or that's where I arrived at those numbers.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Jeff, any questions of the applicant?
I have questions of the assessor.
Okay, go ahead. Ask questions of the assessor then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I know in your property description, outdoor parking has been identified as 0. When I look at your page 2, it looks to me like there is parking at the rear. Can you please confirm?
Yeah, there is parking. To the rear, but it's not a significant amount of space. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 spaces that can be used here. I think when we look at parking for retail, you know, you kind of have to think of the customers arriving to the property and having good visibility and good access to the stores here. Sorry, I'm just hearing an echo. Can you maybe turn down your volume just a little bit? Thank you. Sorry about that. Just having a hard time focusing here. Yeah, so I think in terms of retail, in terms of parking, I think spaces to the rear here tend to be, you know, for the operator of the business, and that they're really not significant when you look at, you know, typical retail, you know, newer modes, for example, such as strip malls or neighborhood shopping center, and suburban parking requirements from the zoning department. Because of where this is, it doesn't face those parking requirements, but if you were to compare it to something like that, or a retail space, for example, in say Kenniston or something like that, the parking requirement is much greater, and it's really a different type of thing here. These spots at the rear are sort of an added bonus for the operators of the business there. But
you indicated, thank you. You indicated in your verbal presentation that a fair rental rate would be between $13 to $16 per square foot.
Correct.
Do you have any $13 comparables?
We just have the one that's 610 Portage Avenue. Here, that's a retail space. Unfortunately, I do not have any other recent ones that are along Portage. So it's more of a general statement and a general range that I was giving.
You indicated that 610 Portage and 912 Portage are likely the best comparables to the subject property. Have you been in either the subject property or those comparables?
I've been to them. I have not been inside. Actually, well, I've been inside the subject, but I have not been inside of the comparables.
Are you able to make any presentation as to comparable wall heights and relative character or fitness of each?
I would suggest that, you know, in terms of the fitness of each, I think from my recollection, these were all fairly, you know, with the exception of a couple at the top here, these are mostly sort of average, if you will, retail spaces. In terms of wall height, it's something that, you know, I don't put a lot of weight on. I don't know that it's for this property type. I don't know that it affects what an asking rent would be, or a rent that was achieved. I don't know that. You know, we range here from 10 feet to 15. And I would say that that's probably pretty typical. I think when you start getting into neighborhood shopping centers and stuff like that, you get to, you know, 22 feet. But for sort of typical retail space, retail stores and strip malls would tend to be between 10 and 15 feet.
Okay. And just my last question, thank you for that response. Can you just walk me through the thinking on the capitalization rate that you presented here?
Yeah, so we've started using a regression analysis for our cap rates. You can see we have a cap rate table on page 8. So we don't actually specifically have outside data for a retail store. Again, distinguishing that from a strip mall. You can see from the outside sources here, Colliers, the next most appropriate, most similar property type would be the retail strip. They don't really explain per se the distinguishing factors between their low and high range here. I would suggest that by the appearance of it, that CBRE and Cushman Wakefield may include retail stores in their strip mall analysis here. From looking at appraisals, I would be very stunned to see cap rates that high for regular strip malls. I would suggest that that's more appropriate for a retail store where there isn't parking in front. Again, on the high side there of CBRE and Cushman Wakefield. And then since we formatted this table as such, we have not included retail stores because it's not included in the outside sources here specifically. And then if you were to include all of the property types, we'd be looking at a pretty long table here. But I can say that, you know, having viewed appraisals that have been submitted to our department and having done some of the analysis in our department on cap rates for this cycle, that 7.1 is a reasonable cap rate in general terms for a retail store in the area. But we have not opted to include any specific sale comparables or any detailed cap rate analysis that was derived from those sales.
Thanks so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Great. Now I have questions of the applicant. I'm sorry, Jeff, if we pass you over for questions for the assessor. Is this delivery only? How much, do you have your own delivery service or do you skip the dishes or something like that?
We do have our own service, but now since COVID and with all the third party, or it's mostly. Most of the stuff goes the new level, all that, but we do have our in-house delivery. We just have like one driver.
Okay. Okay, so you rely mostly on delivery to the local area then?
Yeah.
All right, those are my questions. So are there any follow-up questions? Any summation that you wish to do, Jamie?
No, thank you.
Do you wish to do any summation?
Basically, we've said basically all we have to say on that, I think.
Okay, so that concludes this agenda item then, and so we will move on to 401 Stafford.
Yeah, that's our other location.
Thought it might be.
Yeah. Thank you for making them the same time, by the way. Then.
Okay.
Now, let's, I'll give you the go ahead. I gotta bring up the files.
I didn't receive any compared, like when you guys sent it, I looked at the email, I was going to print it out yesterday, but I didn't receive any, so forgive me if I'll try and listen along as your guys' papers were, but I didn't receive any documentation from you guys.
Do you have the city's?
No, I didn't receive the brief back, no. I thought it was there, so I went to look and then I didn't see it, and then I went to look again and I see my own attachments with that you guys have received, but I didn't receive that. That's all right, I can listen along.
Is there any way we can get her a copy?
It's okay, I can listen along, that's fine.
I'll
Yeah, so she can please follow along then. I will have them.
So it's like, are we taking them to a break?
Just to have you print the documents. For the applicant.
Thank you. I thought, I looked and then I thought, well, I better print them, but I didn't see them.
So you're going off stream while I print this? So just-
I think Michelle went up there.
Maybe we should leave it if you shut up. Thank you.
Okay, Damon, you can proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've got 401 Stafford Street here. The roll number is 120-153-78100. And again, you can see the property on the second page of my brief, if you guys have it open. So you can see the overhead shot here. This is basically a street or two in from Grant. I think this property was previously Robin's Donuts. And the sort of valuation, you know, each property kind of presents with their own uniqueness, different sort of appraisal questions. One of the appraisal questions at this property now and likely going forward is whether or not it's reasonable to have the land value of the property take over. And you can see on the page 2 here, you can see basically 4 similar sized lots here above. And, you know, the one sort of directly across the street, well, I should specify here, the property kind of northernmost, that's a similar size. You can sort of see, it says 909 is the address there. That's a slightly larger building on a similar sized lot, if not a slightly smaller sized lot. And so that building, for example, is maximizing that lot a little bit better, as is across the street from that. To the west of that property, you can sort of see it says 395 Stafford. That one is a multi-story building. And then across the street from the subject, going east at 402 Stafford, that's a car service, basically like a repair shop type of property. That's 402 Stafford there. And see, that's a property type that's making use of the sort of larger parking lot in front. So because this lot has a larger size than is required, and because the building is on the smaller side, and because land values in the area, pardon me? Sorry?
Yelling at me for some reason.
And because the land values have been going up in the area, land value would have taken over here, but it was a conscious decision to override it. And so the original land value assessment, for example, was approximately $650,000. And today we're looking at $411,000. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that before I continue on, to give you a little bit of the sort of lay of the land, so to speak, that we were working with here. I have rental comparables on page 4, and an attempt was made to kind of look at similar areas. I think that, for example, 530 Waterloo Street, I think that's a comparable. It's actually a restaurant, a small restaurant comparable, and that's at $17. I think that's one of the more appropriate ones. But I'll move on from the comparables for now, because I think the rental rate that we have is reasonable. If you look at page 6, you can see the workup here. We have a rental rate of $16.17. As I said, I believe that that's comparable. We have a overall cap rate of 5.75. I think that's perhaps on the low side. I think you could see maybe 6 or 6.5 cap rate might be arguably a better fit. But I did want to touch on the additional land value below that. So without any land value adjustment, the proposed or the assessment would have been $340,000. We have added $71,000 in additional land value as an alternative to recognize that there is additional land value at the property. I believe that the idea to use the additional land value is an attempt to recognize that there is a going concern at the property, and that this is a restaurant, a Robin's Donuts that was built. Actually, it is older than I thought it was. It does say built in 1959, so I'm a bit surprised by that. Regardless, it seems unlikely that it would be torn down in order for it to be redeveloped. But there is that potential that at some point maybe in a not too distant future, if land values keep rising, that it may. So that was an attempt to recognize that, again, there is more land than required here, and that it is in an area that is seeing high land values and redevelopment, to be honest. And so we've included some comparables in terms of the land value. The land rate we've used is $65.53 per square foot. And you can see our comparables for land on page 5. And they range from 51.23 on the low side up to 91.89. Notably, both of those sort of more extreme values are somewhat dated in terms of their sale dates. So that's 2013 and 2014. So the more recent of the comparables that I have here are 936 McMillan Avenue with 61.55, and then 290 River with 80.26. So that's an idea of the land values. These are a little bit further away than the subject, but the type of land values that we're seeing. I did attempt to get closer to the area. Unfortunately, I was not able to find information that seemed appropriate given the size of the subject here. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
If you have any questions of the assistant.
Basically, I was just going to here. For the land value, is that assessed every year, or is that something new, or not every year? I mean, every assessment cycle, or is that something new that the city has just introduced recently? Giving you the value.
It's actually been part of the value since 2016. So 2016 cycle, 2018 cycle, and the 2020 cycle. And I believe actually, just opening here. For example, in the 2018 cycle, I think it was actually part of the agreement that was arrived at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was your question?
Yeah, I think that's my questions for now.
Okay, Jeff, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Assessor, you noted that 530 Waterloo Street is likely one of the better comparables that you've offered on the premises. Just wondering, 530 Waterloo, is that sort of similar fit and finish? Is it a sit or dine-in restaurant?
It is actually a dine-in restaurant. It is similarly sized. It's located within a small, somewhat dated strip mall. I think there's 3 or 4 units. But in terms of, you know, the character of the neighborhood, I think is similar to a degree. It's, you know, within a residential area, but near sort of a larger street, because Portage Avenue is to the north of that property.
Is the subject proper? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Is the subject property similarly a dine-in?
They may have a couple stools, but I think it's primarily takeout. So it's not a perfect comparable, but I think sort of given the choices of comparables, that I think it's among the more fair.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Lauren, any questions?
Actually, this is just, I'm asking clarification for myself in terms of methodology, just so I can understand it. So it sounded to me like you were saying that this is a property where the value of the land is becoming greater than the value as pizza restaurant. So you said you overrode, so does that, just trying to repeat back to make sure I got it. So you overrode, not taking the actual value as it would have based on your regression analysis, et cetera, but you chose to take that, the lower value without the land as a pizza restaurant, and then took an amount, which I guess it wasn't totally arbitrary, obviously, but, and then added it on.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Those decisions weren't by myself, but that is what has happened here. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. I'm not questioning it. The other question I had is this a transitional thing? Like at what point does city assessment, assuming the land values continue to rise, when do you decide to go into the analysis, like some of the land values you've shown here, and move towards that methodology representing land being the value? Like not as a pizza restaurant.
Right. Yeah, I think that it's sort of a case by case situation. There's a concept that you may be familiar with, the highest and best use of a property. Part of that, I think also needs to be tempered by the idea that, we don't see developers buying every single parcel on, Stafford or wherever and tearing down, functional buildings. You may see that sometimes, but it's, I think the logic is that this is a building in good working order. It has a business there that's been there for a number of years. It will reach a point. I would think that you kind of can't deny the land value anymore. Here, there isn't an impediment to having it. There's a building here that's established. How likely do we think that it's going to be torn down? And we also want to be fair and not be kind of speculating on potential interest in the site. That may be coming at some point, but I don't. It's sort of a judgment call, I think, and I'm fairly satisfied with the value that we've got on it currently.
So the city believes that the 411 is the actual market value at this point in time, and so it's not really, you haven't suppressed the assessment, you've just represented it, and you knew these market trends are happening, but this is the value at this point in time.
Right.
Perspective. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Question I have is, how did you determine the amount of the excess land?
As I said, this has been on this property since 2016, and I believe a measurement was made. We have some measurement tools that we can use sort of from our workstation here with GIS layers. And from reading the note, it was done with while reviewing the parking requirements for a building like this, given the square footage of the building and the type of use. And we can look at how many parking spaces would be required. And so a determination was made that part of the reason why land value takes over is because it's done on a per square foot basis. So if you have a lot of land and a small building, the land value is more likely to take over. And that's sort of what was happening here, but I think we tried to temper that by looking at okay, well, what would a building of similar size, how big would it be if it maximized the lot? And I think that's where you get the additional area of approximately, I think it's around 1,000 square feet of excess land that was added in.
And what value did you put on excess land again? You said it, but I was distracted at the time.
65.53 a square foot.
Now, okay, with that excess land, you mentioned about parking requirements. I was going to ask you about that. I know as an example, I guess would be a prime example, was at Logan and McPhillips, where a Robin's Donuts was taken and made into a George's Burger and Sub, where they do a lot of takeout, but they also have a bit of a dine-in area. Were those requirements sort of considered?
So, for example, for the zoning bylaw as it relates to the parking requirements, I don't believe that there is a difference between whether or not it's a sit-down, eat-in restaurant or a takeout restaurant. There is a difference when it comes to drive-through. So I know that, for example, they offset the parking requirement for a drive-through. For one, I think because a lot of the traffic is just picking up and driving off through the drive-through, but also because you're actually taking up quite a bit of space physically with the drive-through. So your land requirement is greater on that basis, but slightly offset by the number of parking stalls that are required.
Okay, I have no more questions. So you can proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. Yes, basically, I'll just give you an overview as you already that we have been in business for 35 years, but we moved into this location in 2003, which we have been occupying, which, as you mentioned, is previously Robin's Donuts. Over those times, we have been assessed every 2 years. So basically, again, I'm respectfully asking that we get an assessed value decrease from the amount that the city is proposing, as we find that a bit exorbitant in raising costs, as I had said. The property values usually increased about 2 to 3% through that. And in 2018, we were assessed at 272. And if we increased it around into the 280s, 290s, and as the assessor, I'm sorry, was it Jamie or the assessor, he had mentioned that the land value, I believe we had spoken this in the last couple of rounds. They have considered that for reasons because of what we're using, we're just take on delivery. But as he had mentioned, it was already taken into consideration of the land value. And that's why I was saying in 2018, everything was included. My assessment was 272. So all of a sudden in 2000 and I believe it was 21, I think it was 411. We were right in the middle of COVID. So we kind of agreed to disagree at that point because we couldn't have any meetings. But basically, I was just trying to work with that number of the 272 that had already been raised up over the years and did include those land values. So I'm having really trouble understanding going up from 411. That's quite a big, again, like 40% increase or 50% increase when everything was 3 years ago supposed to be included. And it wasn't that it was under assessed because it was your assessor board that looked at it and we looked at all the land values at the time. I mean, things go up and down, but not 50%. There's been no development, not a strip mall or a whole bunch of houses built. Nothing that value added at a value of 50%. when it had been already valued from previously. Again, it was not like I fell through the cracks or I haven't seen an assessor for, 10, 15 years. We discuss these things every year, and I believe, as we said, yes, we thank you for taking the value apart, but it was already included in 2018, supposedly. From what I knew from you guys, if I'm wrong, forgive me, but that's why I remember that discussion about the land.
Okay. That's your presentation?
Yes, pretty much.
Okay, Mr. Fougere, any questions?
If it pleases the board, I may be able to just kind of confirm that in 2018 was the last time this property was appealed. In 2018, we agreed to a value of $303,000, and as the applicant says, that does include the land value as well. So that was $303,000 for the cycle of 2018. Just wanted to let you know.
Thank you for correcting.
All right. Lori, any questions of the applicants?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Jeff, any questions of the applicants?
Yes, Mr. Chairperson, thank you for your presentation today. Is there any revenue that is derived from your current parking that you have on the site?
No.
I'm sorry if I am having trouble hearing the response.
No, not currently, no.
No, okay. All right, that's it. Thanks so much.
We share the parking. Sorry for interrupting. We tried to get the doc, because all the doctors' patients, when they were full, used to park there, but we just let them.
Okay. And I have no questions, so thank you very much for your
Thank you
presentation.
very much.
That concludes this property. Let's take a short break till 11:15, and then we'll come back with the next property, which is and 55 NASA unit 102.
Inform you when you're offline. Prepared to speak in the public.
So you're not on camera right now. Okay, we are now back in session. So the next property we have on the agenda is 55 NASA. Suite 102. So you can begin, Mr. Fougere. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Just getting set up here. So we have 102, unit 102, 55 Nassau Street North. The roll number is 1202275870.
Oh, go ahead. We just he's reminding me we need to swear the applicant in when he speaks.
Sure. So I can pause if you wanted to do that now then.
You want you can
Sure.
So, yeah, because we'll ask the questions.
Mr. Bova, please state your full name. Oh, sorry, you are on mute.
There we go. Joseph Bova.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, you can proceed again, Mr. Bourget.
Okay. So we can see the property, the unit 102. I'm not sure which one it is here, but on page 2 of my brief, basically along the first floor, ground level, if you can see where that red light sign is, basically along there, there's I guess maybe 4 units, maybe 5. They're basically small retail office units here within the commercial, within this condo complex. And if you look on my page 4, we have some comparables. Comparable at 11 Evergreen Place is a similar type of situation where we have a retail space basically at the bottom of an apartment or condo complex kind of tower. And then we also have 433 River Avenue, and we have 2 comparables there. And those are office retail type of units within the main floor of a apartment or a residential condo sort of building or complex. And those rates that we're looking at are, $13 and $16.70. So I think that that's probably a fairly reasonable rate. The subject does have an actual rent that's being paid. I believe they're on a month-to-month basis, but we can let the applicant go into a bit of detail on that. And that's in the $13 range as well. So here we're seeing $13.76 in our evaluation on page 5. I would suggest to you, though, that the capitalization rate that we have is low. So I would actually recommend to the board that I would suggest, had we sort of had a chance to do this over, I would suggest a rental rate between $14 and $15. And for example, $14 if it were to be used, and if we used a capitalization rate of $6.35, or sorry,
635.
6.35%. Try that again. And that would lead us to a value of $83,000. And I have not had contact with the applicant as of yet, so I should put that forward as a possibility, should he choose to accept that value. Again, that would be a reduction from 104,000 to 83,000.
Mr. Boba, how do you feel about the city's recommendation of 83,000?
Well, I understand it and I appreciate it. The cap rate is more in line with what I had in mind, but unfortunately the rent isn't. I'll get into my explanation of the uniqueness of these properties and how that's why I never use comparables in my evidence.
Okay, that's fine. We just wanted to know if you accepted the recommendation or not. So you can keep on with your presentation, Mr. Fouger.
Okay. So the only other thing that I would add to that would be that just in terms of the history of the valuation here, in 2020, there was a recommendation that was accepted by the board for 82,000. And I'm proposing here 83,000. So I just wanted to add that bit, but that's my presentation. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Bover, any questions of the assessor?
No, he pretty much answered the cap rate issue that I was going to have, and we'll talk about the vacancy rate and the uniqueness again of the property when it's my turn.
Okay. Lori, any questions of the assessor?
Just a quick one. You had put forward a reduced rental rate and a reduced or a change in the cap rate. You sort of said it was based on a review. Was there anything specific that you're basing your change on, or your proposed change?
Well, I think with regards to the capitalization rate, particularly, I think is the bigger one that the applicant has identified here. The rent top up, I think I would suggest is to kind of carry forward the trend from last cycle, as well as I don't have the dates on the leases, but I imagine that they're maybe a little bit older. Actually, maybe we do have the dates. Sorry. I'm just noticing this now. I apologize. So I think, yeah, what we have reported here, and the applicant can speak to that, is from July 1st, 2012. So I think when I was considering that, I think, it's basically somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 cent, 75 cent top up from what appeared to be the rate from 2012. And then with regards to the capitalization rate, there may be cases where retail has capitalization rates of that scale of 4.95, I believe it was. But really, I couldn't put together any evidence to support that, and I think it's a little bit aggressive. And I was more comfortable with the 635, which we'll see actually matches the other property as well. There's 2 units that the applicant has within the condo complex here. And because of the different uses, we actually had different capitalization rates. So we had 4.95 on the subject here, unit 102. And then unit 101, we have 6.35%. And I think that the difference in the cap rate's not justified, given the fact that it's within the same building, and it's really only driven by the use, which here I would suggest that again, we had this as an office, suburban office income stream, but when you consider what a suburban office is and the inventory that the city has, it's really not really that. There may be an office unit, an office tenant there, but I think it's in terms of all the construction and what's there. I think it makes more sense to match the cap rates
Okay,
at the very least.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, Mr. Chairperson. Have you checked to see if there have been any permits taken out since 1969?
I have not specifically, but I imagine that there would be sort of adequate maintenance and due diligence with any maintenance issues that have arisen. But I have been to the space, several years ago, and I would suggest that it is probably not an effective age would probably be greater than 1969, but it's not as though they've totally redone the unit and it's this extravagant or fancy or has a lot of specially built infrastructure into it or anything like that. I think it's sort of a typical I don't know if the right word it would be average, but adequate unit that serves its purpose.
In your review for rent comparables, were you able to identify anything that was closer to the leased area in the subject property?
No, not without having it be significantly different in other regards. So this is sort of what I was able to see that is seems to be of a similar setup. Again, retail kind of at the base of a multi-story, multi-family complex.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is sort of related to the size. Typically, I mean, you can say there's economies of scale in terms of rent, but at some point, does a unit become so small that limits the use so much that you're not going to have those economies of scale?
That's a good question. Probably. I think that what has happened here, and I'm not speaking with firsthand knowledge of the property, but I think the tenants that have leased out the units, both this one and the next, have sort of found a size that works for them, and I think that there is a market for it, but we're not seeing this big uptick in rent, given that they're fairly small. I think you might see more of the economies of scale go the other way if it were larger than the comparables, and have the kind of projected rental rate go down. But there are leases in place, and I think that they are reflective of market more than likely.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if that answers, but
Yeah, all right. Thank you for that. So Mr. Bover, you can give us your presentation on Unit 102.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you for letting me do this via Zoom. And second, I appreciate the work that Mr. Foguet had to do on these properties because they are unique. So I'll start off with the reasons for the decrease in assessment that I believe. I went with the revenue approach. I don't use the sales approach because I purchased them way back when, and I'm not sure if anything sold around there recently. So we'll start with the revenue. So the unit is 427 square feet. and I rented for $13.34 a square foot. I use a vacancy rate of 10% due to the nature of the space, being that it's small, it's unique, and there's limited factors in that condo for renting. That brings I'm going to remove my management fee because I didn't realize that didn't belong there. My maintenance is at 2%, and then the shortfall, my calculations are below. And then I used a cap rate of 7%. So by removing the management fees, I get a total of $67,500. So we're off between what the assessor would like to use by about, I don't know, $18,000. And that would be basically because of my vacancy rate and the actual rent that I'm using on those units. Some considerations about this space is that it's rented to month to a massage therapist. The tenant has to be approved by the condo board. So if she was to leave, I would have to advertise the space, find someone who wants 427, square feet, and then the condo board has to approve it. And that's not easy. It's not like any other retail space out there where no one really needs to approve it besides, I guess, the city for zoning. Here I've got, 5 or 6 board members that can say yay or nay in regards to what type of tenant I can put there. So that limits my tenant possibilities. There's no advertising allowed on exterior windows. And during the past 3 years, I've had to reduce the rent up to 50% at some times to help during the lockdowns. My tenants are local small businesses. They're not large national corporations that can afford these volatile economic conditions. So high rents wouldn't work in these sort of situations. I would have lost my tenants a long time ago if I was charging 16, 17 bucks a foot. They wouldn't be able to ride this COVID situation. And I guess that's about it for that unit.
Okay, Mr. Fouger, any questions?
The only question that I have, I think, is how 10% vacancy was arrived at.
Like I said, if she was to leave me tomorrow, it would take a long time to find a tenant for that small space, plus having the condo board approve it. It's not like any other rentable space in the area. I've got, controlling factors in regards to the type of tenant I can put there.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Lori, any questions of the applicants?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Jeff, any questions of the applicant?
I have none, thank you.
Okay, I have none of the applicant, but his presentation as to the use of this property, I guess, gives me a question for Mr. Fouger. So the use is as a massage therapist, which would have been highly affected by the lockdowns that been had. How do you account for that sort of thing in vacancy calculation or calculation of the worth of the office?
Right. So the past, reference period for the cycle was reviewed, and we collected vacancy information from the market the way that we normally do outside of COVID. And that, that's what we were seeing. So our figures, we basically collect the vacancy data 2 different ways. We reference the Johnson report, and then we also use the income and expense mailers with the tenant information as a calculation for vacancy. And that's what we were seeing. We have not, I wouldn't say that we're so detailed in our approach that we have sort of, I don't know, subsets of property types, you know, such as this, that are as unique as this. We're not so detailed in our vacancy analysis to specifically identify the vacancy rate for you know, a small commercial condo unit here. That has followed the income stream more generally, and which we have as office here, but the retail income stream also actually has the same percent figure for vacancy.
Okay, I guess the question then for Mr. Bova, was this unit during the shutdowns, was rent being received from them, or was there any rent forgiveness or anything like that?
There was a rent reduction, a slight amount. She wasn't eligible for any government subsidies, so I had to help her out. Yes.
Okay, but that would be be reflected then in the income stream and not the vacancy stream.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Those were my questions. Are there any questions from the panel arising out of that?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you for your presentations on this property. Then we'll go to Unit 101. Let me bring up the.
Just pulling it up here.
Yep. Okay, you can proceed, Mr. Coudray.
Okay, so this is the other unit we've sort of mentioned here. It's Unit 101, 55 Nassau Street North. The roll number is 12032758600. And I've used the same pictures, so we can skip page 2 if you like. But as mentioned, it's sort of on the main floor of the condo complex. And I've actually used the same comparables. As I mentioned before, I still think that the rental rates that are achieved at the property are more or less the market rental rates. I'll take a look to see the start date here on this one, just for background. So this one actually has been, I'm not sure, I think it's a renewal because I believe this tenant has been there previously, but it was actually signed very, very close to the reference date, April 1st, 2020. And our reference date is 2021. So I would consider that to be within the reference date. And you know, given the market and the time with the pandemic, I think it's fair to consider the rent that's being achieved there. So I don't actually have a workup to that effect, but I think that would you know, certainly have its logic to you know, use the actual, which I believe, just let me see here. With our parameters, I think you'd be looking at around 141,000, just for background information. With no change to our parameters, but using the actuals, you'd get a value of 141,000. But outside of that, there's the comparables that I identified previously. $13 and $16.70 at 433 River Avenue, and then $16.71 at 11 Evergreen Place. I think that those potentially are generally locationally better. However, as we've been talking, obviously each of those is found within the main floor of either condo or apartment complex. But that's my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bover, do you have any questions of the assessor?
No, it's similar to the previous property.
Okay, Jeff, any questions of the assessor?
I do not. Thank you.
Hey, Lori, any questions?
Yeah, you said that the assessment will be 141,000 using actual rent.
Correct.
Are you recommending that?
I think that it would be logical, and I think that it if the board chooses to do that, I think that it would make sense given what we see with the rental rate here, or with the signing of the lease in place. I do not have specifically approval to do so, and I know that that would also represent a little bit of a decrease over previous cycle, but I did want to at least have you guys be aware of that information.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and I have no questions, so Mr. Bover, you can proceed with your presentation.
Okay. Basically, again, it's similar. I use the revenue approach on this unit also. Unit 101, the monthly net rent is $11.35 a square foot. I used a vacancy of 10% again. I removed the management fee this time, and the maintenance and the shortfall, and the assessment that I believe it should be is $119,700 based on the removal of the management fee and a 10% vacancy and a 7% cap rate. This unit is rented to a hair salon. They also need to be approved by the condo board. Similar, no advertising on exterior windows. There's no parking. Basically, I don't live in Winnipeg anymore, but I understand there's construction going on in 55 Nassau. So my tenants haven't complained to me about it, but I'm not sure what their parking situation is, if it's gotten any better or worse. But I know that there wasn't any parking. They basically have to share visitor parking with the rest of the building. And this tenant, I had to reduce the rent by 50%. And I almost lost them during COVID because of the lockdowns. They're much more harsh on hair salons in Manitoba than they were, I guess, with other businesses. And she did sign a lease back in 2020. And I guess that's about it.
Can I ask you then, when you said you had to reduce the rents, was that from 1135?
Yes, it would have been half that. Whatever their gross rent. No. Yeah, it was their gross rent had to be reduced by 50. So I had to take most of the hit because condo fees still had to be paid and taxes still had to be paid.
Okay. So do you have, so would it be in the $5 to $6 range that rents you were?
Correct. And I wasn't too concerned about the reduction. I was more concerned about losing the tenant and knowing what it would take to get someone in there again, what it would cost and the time and the carrying costs. That was more of my concern. And luckily, they managed to come through and they're able to pay the rent now.
Okay, and was there any recouping of that rent?
No,
No, so it's just lost money,
Lost.
lost.
and like, correct. And I was willing to take that loss not to lose a tenant. And that's why I haven't raised the rents much. That's why they're not comparable to the area. Like, I don't want to stretch these tenants that leave me, and then I know what it takes to get them back, new tenants. It's expensive.
Okay. I've kind of jumped in before I should have, but Lori, do you have any questions?
No, no, thank you.
Jamie, did I give you a chance to ask questions?
I'm not sure if you did, but I don't have any questions.
Okay, Jeff, any questions?
Just one point of just confirmation for me. So the current rent, to be clear, is $11.31 per square foot.
Correct.
And when did it go back up to $11.31?
When they were able to go back to work, I want to say, I'm not sure, November, possibly of 21.
November.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I have no more questions, so I thank you for your presentations. So we will move on to the last property on the agenda, which is 218 Marion Street. What's that?
Oh, yes.
Sounds like same.
And I think may need to swear the
Yes,
applicant
we
in
will
here
have to
as
swear
well.
the new applicant in. Yes.
Mr. Yankiski, are you there? We will swear you in and we can continue.
Hi, I'm here.
Mr. Yankiski, please state your full name.
Andrew Yankiewski.
You affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do so affirm.
Thank you.
All right, so you may proceed, Mr. Portage.
Okay. Okay, so the property is 218 Marion Street. The roll number is 0607 508 2000. And so the assessed value that we have on it is 394,000. You can see beginning on page 2, you can see the subject here. And then on page 3, you can see the front of the building. We have this as a retail property, but it could actually arguably be considered a type of office property. I understand this is a recording studio, and when the applicant presents, we can see some of his pictures of the interior. But on page 4, you can see the back of the property. So this is a more recent addition that was done, and it expands the main floor a little bit, as well as some space that was, I guess it was previously kind of attic space. You can see on page, if we jump to page 7, we can see the two different areas that we have here. And reviewing the applicant's brief, it appears that our areas may be off somewhat. The applicant identified the areas as being 492 square feet for the kind of second floor area that, is sort of a loft kind of a small bedroom kind of area. Again, he has indicated 492 square feet total, and we have 547. And then on the main floor, he has indicated a slightly smaller area as well of 1,317 square feet, as opposed to 1,451. So 1,317 is what the owner of the property has indicated is the area. We have comparables on page 6. And I think probably, I was trying to find a similar property in the area that was sort of a converted kind of house, basically. And I really wasn't able to find any usable information in our system for that. I was able to find, in the absence of ideal comparables, I think are two of our better comparables would be 123 Marion Street, and then 300 Taché, which is also 298 Taché. So basically the bottom four, I think, give a kind of a general sense of retail in the area, a retail or potentially office, actually. I want to point out two comparables here that are second floor rents. I've bolded beside the address here that they are second floor. Unit 202 at 123 Marion Street is a second floor tenant, and then 288 Marion Street Unit A is also a second floor tenant, and they're showing rents in the $12 range. Given the level of finish of the subject, which I think is fairly good and professional in its appeal, and then looking at what I would think is more desirable space, 123 Marion, and even to a certain extent on Taché, 300 Taché, I think that a rental rate, in the basically between $15 and $18 for the main floor would probably make sense. Here, I think I'm willing to propose a rate of $16 for the main floor, and then $11 for the second floor. And with the revised areas that I had mentioned, this leads us to a value of $318,000. And for this one, I am prepared to make that a recommendation to the panel. And so
Okay.
maybe I can let the applicant respond if that would.
Yes, how do you feel about that recommendation?
Oh, I think we can't hear you. Sorry.
Sorry, muted. Sorry, I've been hanging out for a while here. Yeah, and that certainly is closer to the mark in terms of my perception of the value of the property, perhaps a little bit higher than my perception, but it certainly is closer than the notice that I received.
Okay, so are you willing to accept that recommendation then?
Procedurally, if I don't, then we would just go through the entire process, if I understand correctly, and then I just wait for a judgment at the end of the day.
Yes. Yeah. So you want to do that then?
I believe so. Yes, I feel like that would be the best way to proceed.
Okay, thank you very much then. So Mr. Fruiter, is anything you wish to conclude on?
The only thing that I would like to maybe follow up on, we'll wait for the applicant's testimony, but just something to look out for. The applicant has included pictures of the basement, and there is a crack in the basement foundation. I would just like to know a little bit more information about that. But outside of that, I think that's the information that I have. So
Okay, you'll have a chance to question him on that during his presentation.
right.
All right, questions of the assessor.
So this is my turn to ask questions, just to be clear?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, no problem.
You
Yeah,
just
sorry,
asked
I've
me.
got a handle on the procedure. I just wanted to make sure I didn't speak out of turn.
No, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have no questions at this time.
Okay, now Jeff, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Just one point of clarification on your recommendation. You indicated that you're proposing a rental rate on the main floor of $16. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what was the proposed rental rate on the second floor?
11.
11. And that's based on which comparable?
That's based more generally on what the space, how it appears in the photographs, the model rate, as well as looking at the comparables that I've found here, 1261 for second floor space, which is of a similar size. And then the $12, which is a much bigger space, but in a renovated building there at 123 Marion. So I think it, just in terms of the scale of the adjustment, I felt that $11, generally speaking, represented a reasonable scaled back rate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Lori?
Yeah, just a really quick one. Prior to your recommendation here, were all of the numbers and the rents, et cetera, model driven and the console model driven?
So the numbers for the subject was model driven. The comparables are all market-based rental rates that have been reported to the city of Winnipeg.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I have no questions, so you may begin your presentation then.
Okay, so yeah, I provided some information about my building, and I took some pictures from Google Maps, just for your information here, about some of the comparables. In terms of my building, I know some questions will come up about the basement, so maybe I'll just anticipate that. We have large horizontal cracks along the basement. As far as I can tell, all throughout the foundation, not all of the walls are visible. The building is a 1913 house that at some point, I'm guessing in the 1960s or 70s, was converted into commercial property, just based on what I've seen in the building in my time here. The 1913 building was added onto by me in 2016. That's what I guess we can call the addition, or in the pictures that I provided, I've just referred to it as the 2016 building, just to differentiate it. But the basement only exists under the 1913 building. The 2016 building is built on piles. Just to clarify that. Prior to embarking on the 2016 build, after speaking with a number of builders, I'll try and summarize here to keep things streamlined. It was determined that no real meaningful renovations could take place in the 1913 building without considerable cost, possibly a better idea just to demolish the building. So in order to shore things up so that we could go ahead with the piles and the addition, we had angle iron added to reinforce the basement so that that would be possible. So just to explain that, I know that could have come up in the question, but I'll just anticipate it here since I did include a number of photos of the basement and some detail of that crack. So that does pose a bit of a challenge in terms of the value of the building. And indeed, I was told by a number of builders that it would be a much better idea just to demolish this building. That ultimately was not within my budget, not what I decided to do. So we went ahead with the angle iron in the 2016 edition. The 2016 edition is largely, like, it is, just to be clear, it's an entirely owner occupied space, and correct, it is a recording studio and post-production facility. And so there's no rental aspect to my business at this time, and the building hasn't been improved or modified in such a way so as to be focused on any kind of a lease or rental aspect, just so that part is understood. The primary purpose of the addition was to add a kitchen space to our existing studio and a seating area, which you can see in some of the photos. For example, if you take a look at, let me see in my brief here, I'm just going to find the picture. Page 18 of 28 would be a good example of that kitchen space. And then also page 19 of 28 gives you an idea. An important point to raise is that there is no separate bathroom in the 2016 building. So there, for the entire building, there is just the single bathroom that exists in the 1913 building. So the space isn't really readily demisable. There is an entrance off of the parking lot to the 2016 building, and that is the only entrance. And then there's a front entrance in the 1913 building, which is a storefront style entrance that you can see in the photos as well. At this point, shall I speak to the comparables?
Go ahead.
Comparables?
Well, it's your presentation, so.
I'm allowed to speak to the comparables. I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So the essence of my presentation is essentially that the comparables I don't think are fair comparables to my building. Admittedly, my building is a bit of a unique building, although other buildings of this type do exist in this neighborhood and throughout the city. A hybrid between a house and an addition at some newer point in time. And I'm just not seeing that in the comparables here. I'll go through them. So on my page 24 of 28, I provided a photo and some information about 150 Goulet. This is a strip mall constructed in 1990. So given that the bulk of my building is the 1913 building, I'm going to refer to some of these constructed dates as being more recent. We have a steel beam style construction here. We have multiple units that are self-contained with multiple entrances. My contention is that a building such as this isn't really comparable to my building, and the reasoning being that it is designed and built for the purpose of leasing as a commercial space. So it fundamentally differs from my space, being a strip mall. In addition to being more recent in general. 288 Marion Street, we have this building as well here. It's a brick building, commercial space. On the front, you can see that this is on page 25 of 28. You can see that there are.
If I can stop you there, our really ends at page 22.
It ends at page 22.
Yeah,
I
basically.
wonder if you weren't given my updated brief. That's strange. Yeah, because all of my evidence really begins at page 23 with the detailed evidence.
Yeah, you can still speak to the comparables, but we don't have that material before us.
Okay, I'm just going to check my email and see what was sent.
Was this rebuttal that you submitted the other day?
Yeah, it would be rebuttal, I guess. Does that change how the documents are submitted?
It does a bit. Would you like to see the rebuttal evidence as now?
Yes, if he's speaking to the rebuttal evidence, we should see it. Yes.
So if we could take a 2-minute recess.
Okay. We will have a 2-minute recess while the secretary provides the rebuttal evidence. Do you have that rebuttal evidence, Jamie?
I have submitted to the.
Rebuttal evidence?
Yes.
I do not have rebuttal evidence.
I will
Okay.
try it.
Okay, it will be sent to you then.
Okay, thank you.
I'll have it, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're back in session now. Everybody has the rebuttal. It's basically a new version of the presentation with extra pages, 23 to 28 on it. So you can proceed again, Mr. Applicant.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Chairperson. I have yet to receive the rebuttal.
I have, it should be with the SharePoint link that I provided with you. You'll need to refresh it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, now you can proceed again.
No problem. Thank you so much. Appreciate the help with that. So yeah, so on page 23, as you may be able to see, I've created a synopsis of my rebuttal evidence similar to what I expressed verbally. And just moving on to the next page, which would be page 24, I'll just back up a little bit in my presentation. So 150 Goulet, I provided a Google Maps image. There's a couple of units that were referenced in the assessor's brief there. Once again, my contention that this is a steel beam construction strip mall, multiple self-contained spaces with multiple entrances and exits, clearly targeted towards commercial leasing. Differs greatly, in my view, from my property based on that information. Built in 1990, much more recently than the majority of my building. 288 Marion, moving on to page 25 of 28. Similarly, this is a brick building. It has, you can see in the Google Maps image, two clearly separate entrances, one for each of the floors of this building. So once again, either purpose-built or at some point modified at significant expense to make the unit self-contained and separate. So my contention, once again, is this fundamentally differs from my property, which is a 1913 house with the slightly newer addition, providing a few hundred additional feet of kitchen and meeting space. So this building was built in 1956, according to the information available. 123 Marion, also a brick building. This is on page 26 of 28, just continuing sequentially through my rebuttal evidence here. Similarly, we can see that there are multiple units, each self-contained with separate entrances and exits. This is also the case for the second floor space on this building. Once again, to note, my building, the second floor space consists of an attic in the 1913 building, and it also consists of a small mezzanine area of approximately a couple hundred square feet, which is the access to that attic. And also to an external second floor deck on my building, which you can see in some of the photos provided by the assessor's evidence and in mine as well too. So just back to 123 Marion, once again, my contention that this is fundamentally different constructed and designed building, either designed for or at significant expense converted to commercial leasing space. The primary business of a space like this is to be leased, and that is the primary purpose of the property, which is fundamentally different from the property that I own. Finally, there are two units that are referenced in the assessor's brief at 126 Marion Street. I know they are listed as being on Taché. When I looked them up in the city's database and on Google Maps, my understanding is that these units, which are 298 and 101 300 Taché, are units in 126 Marion or 126 Marion. You can see from the Google Maps image on page 27 of 28 that this is in fact an apartment building. Constructed in 1940, recently modified. The commercial aspect to it is a series of self-contained storefronts in the base of the building. I believe some of them are being used as restaurants and similar purposes. I think there is a type of salon in there as well too. But regardless, self-contained units, separate entrances and exits, forming part of a much larger apartment style building. Once again, my contention, fundamentally different in nature and construction and design. And materials from my building. So I will stop there, and that is my presentation.
If I can ask, what value would you place on your property then, and how would you arrive at that value?
So the information, I purchased the building in 2012 for $142,500, and then the addition cost me approximately $162,000. So the information that I have in terms of my experience with this building that is kind of, based on nothing speculative, based on hard costs. And I know that construction costs don't always relate to market value. I certainly appreciate that. But it's in the neighborhood of the $300,000 mark is my understanding.
Okay, Mr. Fouget, any questions of the applicant?
No. Oh, I guess I do actually. With regards to the basement crack, do you have any water that leaks into the basement as a result of that?
I will say that we are fortunate to be fairly high up here. So compared to, say, Norwood Flats, which is just a few blocks away from me, we're pretty fortunate here. But this year with the rains, we did get some water. I'm happy to report it wasn't significant, but it is a consideration. So yeah, it didn't cause any damage just because it was mostly visible on the side of the basement that you can see in some of the photographs, which is like a furnace room type area. But there was in fact some water that collected.
Right. And was there like an engineering report or anything done to kind of help you review your options when you realized that in order to add on to the building, this needed to be stabilized? Was there anything?
At that time, yeah, there was, pursuant to the build with the documents I filed with the city. I mean, anecdotally, I can tell you I did have one designer and structural engineer in who basically told me it was a hopeless case, which I know that's not the subject what we're talking about here, but I was quite demoralized for a period of time. Fortunately, I did ultimately get Wolfram Engineering in here with another designer that I ultimately hired, and I was introduced to the concept of the angle iron, and that's the process that they spoke of when they first came in. And that's ultimately what they based their structural engineering drawings upon, and that's in fact what was installed.
And are you satisfied that, to your knowledge, that this solution has stabilized the walls of your basement?
Yeah. As a layperson, I can only present my understanding of it, but my understanding is that it would at least provide the level of stability so that when the piles were drilled for the addition, that we wouldn't be worried about stability issues with the 1913 building. And I think the one engineer that I had down that was very negative about it obviously was concerned about that. The other engineer saw a solution, and I'm pleased to report that it's still holding up. My main issue is, I wish as an owner that the foundation was stable so that I could have made the kinds, or in the future could make modifications to this building to improve it for my business purposes. Unfortunately, that's not realistic with this building. So going forward, one of the only options for me to improve the structure where I mostly run my business, which is the 1913 building, would be to consider demolishing it and potentially a new structure. I know that's not really the subject here, but my understanding based on speaking to the engineers is anecdotally is that. So.
Okay, and you had mentioned some construction costs of about $162,000.
Correct.
For the newer portion. Does that include the work done for the basement here, or is that?
That includes the work done for the angle iron in the basement. Yes.
Okay.
That was actually the first thing that was undertaken, as you can imagine.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Any Lori, any questions?
I'm just flipping through because I know you said it. Your addition was done, you said in the 60s?
So the addition is 2016. The addition.
Oh, 2016. Okay, thanks.
2016.
On that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is that it?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Jeff, any questions of the applicant?
I have none. Thank you for your presentation today.
Yeah, and I have no questions. And that includes this property as well as we have heard all the items scheduled, and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, you guys. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie.
Thanks.
So I will take us offline. Enough.